Because that is the thing about the Soviet Union that made it so frightening. It wasn't what they would do in the course of their conquests, which is mostly what we've been discussing in this episode up to this point. Their methods of conquest were as savage and unrestrained as any the world had ever seen, including from the Germans and Japanese in the Second World War, but they weren't unique. Armies have been committing mass murder and rape and indiscriminate destruction of property, ethnic cleansing, genocide for a long, long time. And the Soviets were bad, but they weren't alone in being bad. What set the communists apart as an evil that was truly unprecedented in human history was not what they did to take control, but what they did once they had it. It's become somewhat of a trope in recent years to compare the body counts of fascism and communism. But I don't know, relative body counts just don't get at the heart of what made communism so scary. It's scarier than the militant nationalism that manifested in countries like Spain or Italy or even Germany. Scarier to me, at least. Or maybe not scarier, but more alien. Or when I think about fascism, I don't see anything that I don't recognize in one form or another from other regimes in history. It doesn't look particularly unfamiliar. Even Hitler. Yes, he covered over his animality with the sheen of modernist racialism and the eugenics theories that were popular at the time among Western intellectuals, and kind of took that idea to its horrific logical conclusion. But at the bottom of it, when I read about him, when I read about Hitler, I see a pretty straightforward genocidal dictator. I don't see anything that I don't really recognize from somewhere in the past. Yes, he had modern theories attached to it, and he had the efficient German state and modern technology, so he was able to fashion a killing machine that we had never really seen before, perhaps. But basically, I see Genghis Khan spouting racial pseudoscience. Emile Cioran wrote somewhere that after everything that had happened in the preceding 1,000 years in Europe, the ups and downs and accomplishments and failures and everything, that after everything, Europe deserved a higher quality monster than Hitler and his petty bourgeois thugs. Cioran always had a way of putting things. The fascists, again, they just look more familiar to me. They wanted what you had. Maybe they wanted your resources or your land. Maybe they wanted to enslave you. And if you were in the way, of course, that sucks to be you. And I know it doesn't matter to the victims who puts a bullet in your head or who puts your family in a gas chamber or in a mass grave. But I'm just speaking as an observer, thinking about the history, trying to figure out, where did this come from? How could this happen? And fascism just doesn't look completely unfamiliar to me. But I go through my history books from ancient to modern times, and I don't find anything. I don't find any precedent for what we saw in the early decades of Soviet communism, at least not at scale. You might be able to point to a short-lived religious cult or two, or something like that, where it compares to the way the Soviet communists insisted on absolute control over not only your words and your deeds, but over your thoughts. If you take the definition of totalitarianism literally, as a system that seeks not mere obedience, but absolute control over the total person and the society, then the fascist states, while certainly authoritarian and brutal, were not even necessarily properly totalitarian, at least not during peacetime, not all the time. Whereas the fascists viewed certain political movements and racial groups or ideologies as potential threats, communists saw all of mankind as the enemy. All of mankind had been corrupted by bourgeois, feudal, or religious institutions from birth, and so required a transformation and rebirth in order for the new Marxist communist man to emerge. And they applied this way of thinking even to themselves. Even the inner of the inner circles of the communist cadres, whether you're talking the Soviet Union or Maoist China or even individual revolutionary groups around the world, would put themselves through these regular struggle sessions, that were intended to root out the corruption and purge the corruption in each one of their own hearts. Even when you consider the most extreme example, which is, of course, the Nazis' relationship to the Jews, to put it very crudely, the Nazis wanted the Jews gone. If they could have put them on a spaceship and sent them to colonize Mars on a one-way trip, they probably would have done it. In the 30s, the Gestapo was working with Zionist groups to help them run the British blockade of Palestine. During the Evian Conference in 1938, when countries around the world got together to try to work out a solution where they would each take some number of Germany's Jews and just end the crisis that way, Hitler said if they could come to an agreement, I'll put them all on luxury liners and send them on their way. He may have just been cracking, but a lot of the Nazis' actions up to and even after that point are kind of run in that direction. Even to the point while the war was going on, the German government was still actively exploring ways to possibly send the Jews to a colony on Madagascar or out over the Ural Mountains somewhere. Again, I'm not condoning or downplaying at all any of that stuff. I'm more just saying that I recognize it. I open up a history book and I recognize it from somewhere. And basically, the Nazis wanted the Jews to leave, and they wanted it enough so that once all those other options were foreclosed, they engaged in systematic mass murder. The Soviet Union didn't want you to leave. In the Soviet Union, you weren't allowed to leave. It wasn't about wanting to get rid of you. They wanted you there. Because again, the horror of communism wasn't what they did to achieve power. Although it was horrifying, comparable in every way to the worst fascist crimes. It was what they did to their subjugated populations once they had you. There had never been anything like the Soviet Union under Stalin. Not at that scale and with that kind of power and with those global totalizing ambitions. And the funny thing is, as instinctually conservative as I am in certain ways, I actually appreciate Marx and many Marxist thinkers. But the version of Marxism, refracted through Lenin and politically manifested in the USSR, that sought not only to smash capitalism and replace it with centrally planned collectivist economics, but made it its mission to destroy everything that people had valued for thousands of years, to cause children to hate their parents and parents to suspect their children, to make people hate their national culture and disavow their faith and spit on their heritage and their traditions. To my mind, it was something like Satanism in a modern disguise. And there was never a greater threat to human civilization.